I'm Jay McFarland, Director of the Smart Cities Research Center. Also hosting today is my colleague, Professor Daniel Rodriguez, who is co-leader for this seminar series entitled Applications of Data Science and Artificial Intelligence to Equity, Race, and Inclusion in Mobility and Transportation. We're all very excited about the rapid growth of data science and AI being applied to mobility. But as with all digital implementations of process, there's also the possibility of unintended consequences. We could propagate inherent biases or misuse the technologies. Our aim in these discussions is to address applications in the mobility and transportation space and specifically explore these ideas as it refers to race, equity, and diversity. 2 weeks ago, we heard from Ramses Maddow, the manager of planning, policy, and sustainability for the Department of Transportation for the City of San Jose. He gave us a real-world view of the challenges associated with implementing transportation equity, sharing with us their proposed metrics that aim to monitor equity. For example, tracking traffic enforcement, investments in transportation improvements, and access to transit by race. Today, we're here to talk about a technology that's been under development for years, facial recognition, which has certainly been propelled by deep learning techniques. However, there's a lot of concern about its use and the underlying data that serves it, including how government entities might use it. Of note, the FBI's facial recognition search has access to local, state, and federal databases containing more than 641 million face photos. Last year, a Senate bill entitled Ethical Use of Facial Recognition Act was introduced. In it, they stated, facial recognition is a technology that's increasingly being used and marketed to law enforcement agencies without appropriate debate or consideration of its impacts. It's been shown to disproportionately impact communities of color, activists, immigrants, and other groups that are often already unjustly targeted. Has a history of being inaccurate, particularly for women, young people, African Americans, and other ethnic groups. Has been used at protests and rallies, which could chill speech. And finally, they stated that it's critical that facial recognition not be used to suppress First Amendment related activities, violate privacy, or otherwise adversely impact individuals' civil rights and civil liberties. So we have a lot of interest percolating around this particular technology. So today, I'm very excited to introduce two very brilliant people, Elizabeth Adams and Doug Aley. They've been at the forefront of developing principles for accountable AI from the perspective of deep facial recognition expertise. This will be a two-part discussion, leading with Elizabeth, who will discuss her work focused on making use of AI-enabled technologies more inclusive and transparent. Elizabeth is an AI ethics advisor and technology integrator focused on ethical tech design and tech inclusion. She is a race and tech fellow at Stanford University's Institute of Human-Centered AI. She also impacts the world, serving as a key constituent for the United Nations 3C Roundtable on Artificial Intelligence. Elizabeth will be followed by Doug, who has been leading the development of techniques for training away algorithmic bias in these algorithms. Doug has spent his career helping to found, lead, and scale technology ventures. He is the CEO of Paravision, a leading developer of facial recognition technology, and an operating partner at Atomic VC. He started his career at 19 as an entrepreneur with a company focused on making computer applications and websites accessible to people with disabilities. And he hasn't stopped building companies since. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge co-sponsorship of this talk, the Center of Information Technology Research in the Interest of Society, the Banatao Institute, and the College of Engineering. Finally, if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and we will address the questions at the end of the talks. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. I am going to share my screen here. And if you could let me know if you could see it. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
All right, so thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. As you said, I am Elizabeth M. Adams, and I bring you greetings from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm thrilled to be here today to share a bit of my work and my research and a bit of my own personal experience as it relates to AI ethics, race, equity, and the civic tech initiative I've been working on here in the city of Minneapolis. So let's get started. The civic tech initiative I've worked on over the past year is called PostMe, Public Oversight of Surveillance Technology and Military Equipment. So just a little bit about me before we get into PostMe. I've been researching and working in the AI ethics space for the past 3 years. I've been a technologist for over 20 years, and I've led large-scale technology programs for the government. And in one role, I ran a systems integration lab with over 200 technologists. The goal of this program was to decide very quickly if the technology that was being developed, purchased, and customized would align with our chief goal, which was to keep people safe. And I say that because not only do I have the actual experience of setting up teams of engineers and software developers and architects and modeling and simulation experts with the goal of keeping people safe, but I also have seen the consequences of what happens when tech design is not human-centric, which is partly what drives my work in this space. I am a founding member of the PostMe Coalition, which is a local measure within the CCOP's effort for the ACLU. And we formed this coalition early last year to work on advocating for transparency, oversight, accountability, and equity in the use of technology in the city of Minneapolis. Following the murder of George Floyd here in Minneapolis, our work with PostMe became particularly motivated by an urging for accountability in how law enforcement uses AI-enabled technology tools that they have at their disposal. Now, PostMe does not come from a place of technophobia. Rather, our coalition is about embracing technology proactively so that when these tools are implemented in communities, there is trust that these tools are being used responsibly and not used to target certain populations or used by law enforcement to overreach in communities. So here are various surveillance technologies we included in our draft ordinances. And again, our goal was centered in transparency and accountability. And as these technologies become more popular in their use, we felt it was imperative to begin educating policymakers on the impacts to communities if there wasn't proper oversight. And I want to highlight that those advocating for tech transparency here in Minneapolis are regular citizens who have a desire to live safely and confidently in their own communities. And for the remainder of my time, I'm going to focus on this huge community lift that happened as a result of the absence of AI ethics, in my opinion, meaning the absence of an organization's practice of a set of principles and techniques and values and accepted standards that guide the behavior and conduct in the development and deployment of artificial intelligence technologies. The biggest impact of our PostMe work happened on February 12th of this year, when the Minneapolis City Council banned facial recognition technology. It was a huge community lift. And there are many, many stories behind the headlines. You see, before you can even get to a city council passing proposed legislation, there are hours upon hours of advocacy work happening. And the question for me is always why? Why should residents in a city have to take up the mantle to advocate for a ban on technology? What is it about certain technologies and their use that cause communities to unite and work together to advocate for not just transparency, but for an actual ban? And how does what happens on the left in corporations and in offices around the world create the situation on the right? And this is what I consider the missing links in humane engineering. Let's talk about technology development for a minute. So if we think about what happens or is happening on the left in workspaces all over the world, budgets are approved, employees are hired, someone is overseeing the life cycle of the development project, work begins, agile design, development, testing, and execution. And we're also involving teams such as sales and marketing and customer service and training teams. They are all a part of this life cycle as well. All of this work, time, money, and energy is allocated to what seems to be an exciting initiative to advance technology, only to end up with what happens on the right. With our recent work in Minneapolis to ban facial recognition technology, I wanted to share a little bit more about facial recognition technology at a high level. Facial recognition is a form of computer vision and is a way of recognizing a human face through technology. It takes images, it detects faces, and compares faces to a data set to identify the faces and the features. A data set can contain millions of images to help train systems to spot specific attributes like hair, your eye, your skin color, and even facial hair. And bias in facial recognition happens when there is a lack of diversity in the training data, when the training data does not include an equal mix of ethnicities, genders, and ages and skin tones. And let's take it a step further. Consider facial recognition as capturing and identifying you by creating your own unique face print. And this is a way to illustrate how your unique face print is created. Again, the tool captures your face, it creates your unique face print and tries to match your face print in a database. And facial recognition could be a promising tool to screen large crowds without invasive searches, but in reality, there are some communities that have experienced a reinforcement of racial biases due to the lack of transparency, lack of regulation, which has led to false arrests and harassment. In this computer vision example, our coalition members used Google's Vision AI, an online application that derives insights from your images to detect emotion, understand text, and more. And we can see how this technology has predicted various items in the images. In both pictures, a temperature is being taken. But with the image of the lighter skinned person on the left, the algorithm predicts one set of labels: technology, electronic device, photography, and possibly a mobile phone. With the image of the darker skinned person on the right, the algorithm predicts and labels items in the photo such as gun, photography, firearm, and plant. And remember I said earlier that bias happens when there is a lack of diversity in the training data, when the training data doesn't include an equal mix of ethnicities, genders, ages, and skin tones, which has been demonstrated to cause errors in predictive algorithms. If we take this one step further, in this example, we lightened the image to see if the prediction would change. And as you can see, it indeed changed. Once the image was lightened, a gun was not part of the prediction. What was part of the prediction contained a hand. And these technologies are being sold and used by law enforcement around the world. And law enforcement is using these tools to augment their work. And when you see these things I'm showing you, I just want you to keep at the forefront of your mind that it's everyday citizens that are doing the work to call these things out. And the impacts to communities of color and vulnerable populations are great. And all of this was missed during the entire life cycle of the technology development. There was a lack of diverse and inclusive lenses. Let's talk about Clearview Ai and Minneapolis. So Clearview Ai is a company that has gained international notoriety for building facial recognition technology by training its artificial intelligence on billions of photos scraped from social media websites without permission. Their position is if you posted it, it's public. The Minneapolis Police Department used Clearview Ai's facial recognition technology until the ban in February of this year. And we have a whole page dedicated to Clearview Ai on our PostMe website. If you want to view it, you can find out more about our research. But we felt that Minneapolis residents deserved civic infrastructure that champions transparency, respects community standards, and performs effectively. And Clearview Ai failed across the board. In fact, its disregard for standards called for major web platforms such as Microsoft and Facebook and Twitter to issue cease and desist letters. In Minneapolis, there were 3 city initiatives that helped us gain momentum and traction when working on our post-meet ordinances. In December of 2017, the City of Minneapolis passed racial equity ordinances. They overlay racial equity lenses on all of their businesses and practices. And I was appointed to the Racial Equity Community Advisory Committee in May of 2019. And I leveraged this opportunity to begin dialogue about tech transparency and to help policymakers and the city attorney and the city clerk and boards and commissions understand the importance of transparent technology and the considerations that should be a part of these discussions. And in February of last year, the City of Minneapolis passed data privacy principles. The city is now required to tell you when they collect your data, how it's being collected, who is collecting it, and why, and how long it's being kept. And then last July, after George Floyd was murdered, the City of Minneapolis Council declared racism a public health emergency, which means the city now prioritizes services, resources, and attention to those things deemed as perpetuating racism. COVID testing, protecting protesters, and even some eviction cases. So up until this point, we've covered what happens in technology development, what happens when communities advocate for themselves. We've also covered examples of images of tech bias and harms that were built in, and we've talked about measures that the City of Minneapolis has incorporated to address racial disparities. And in all of that, there is now also recent dialogue in the tech ethics space regarding shifting the conversation to calling algorithmic bias algorithmic harms, and in my opinion, for good reason. And this tweet is from Sasha Costanza-Shock, who is a leader and an expert in the design justice space. And what I'm learning is the impact of calling something bias or algorithmic bias. It really feels like we are talking about something out there. Because in the talking about bias, we are actually discussing and sharing an outcome of technology, a thing, versus the impact to humans, harm. And as I've experienced, there is less of a sense of urgency from policymakers to fix a thing unless we are discussing the impacts to humans. So again, I ask, why would a community need to advocate for itself against surveillance technology and take away time from doing more joyful things with their family and their friends? And what many Black and Brown communities and other communities and populations are facing is that those who are designing these technologies are not designing these technologies with Black, Indigenous, people of color, and other impacted individuals in mind. In fact, these groups that include people who look like me and have a lived experience as I do, have been an afterthought. With the glaring missing links through the technology life cycle, where do we go from here? I intentionally removed the line separating the two ends of the spectrum. So in hopes that we could have real conversations about the missing links in humane engineering. And this is where I hope this real life use case provides some perspective on how to design technology so that our technology worlds and our social worlds no longer collide, but in fact, they complement each other, which is what I call purposeful technology or purposeful artificial intelligence. And I love this diagram here, created by the Next Generation Internet Initiative as part of the European Commission, because it gives people a place to start conversations, research, and hopefully engage in the work of responsible technology and in AI. So what do I want personally out of all of this work that I'm doing? I want every person on the planet to get to a place of self-actualization. That is my personal chief aim. And as we enter into the fourth industrial revolution, we are carrying over into our digital spaces the same harmful practices of exclusion, racism, discrimination, and prejudice. And it breaks my heart that children and marginalized communities are not getting the same opportunities as others. Their parents and caregivers are taking away time from their lives to fight these systems of inequities. So if you want to get involved, please do. Pick any area. There are various ways to get started, and I hope that you will think differently about the impact certain technologies are now having on communities. And I realize that that's a lot to unpack, but I hope it gives us enough to discuss when we have our further conversation. And now I would like to turn it over to Doug.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Jane, can you hear me okay? All right, great. And I will share my screen now. And I will start by saying it is always a tough act to follow when I follow Elizabeth. And yet, one of the reasons why both of us are here today is I'm really proud to say that Elizabeth is our Chief AI Ethics Advisor, announced relatively recently. And one question you might ask is, why does a computer vision company, which Paravision is, that is probably best known for face recognition, try to bring somebody on board to that has worked to actually ban face recognition in the city of Minneapolis? And it's actually precisely because of that, and because of Elizabeth's views on how we should be more mindful of how we create technology that's impacting communities. That's exactly the reason why we asked her to come aboard and help us. And so we're at the very beginning of our relationship, but we're really excited because we think she brings a really pragmatic view of not necessarily anti-tech, but responsible tech, and looking forward to many seasons of her helping us. So I'm again Doug Aley, CEO of Paravision. Here to talk to you a little bit today about what we do. But first, I want to talk a little bit about face recognition use cases. And it's rare that I actually get to start a conversation without talking about what face recognition is. But since Elizabeth did such a wonderful job of doing that, I can dispense with that and dive right into some use cases. So a lot of icons on the screen here, and I'm going to ask you to kind of separate in your mind this top row here from this bottom row. And then I'll come back to why they're not separate. But this top row represents sort of military use cases for face recognition, police and law enforcement use cases for face recognition, and then public or private kind of surveillance use cases. Those three use cases have sort of been the predominant targets of kind of media exposure around the use of face recognition, and rightly so. I would like to throw out there that there are several other uses of face recognition that are as interesting, if not more interesting, especially when you're thinking about transportation and access to transportation broadly down the line. But and those are the face recognition that you may use on your phone, if it's an iPhone or some models of the Android. Access control into and out of buildings, which we see coming to market over the course of the next couple of years. Payments and point of sale machines, ID verification. So if I am applying for a job in the gig economy, or I'm just getting a passport, those types of things, being able to match those. Ticketing for events, we see that as a sort of a future trend as well. Time and attendance applications. So I'm punching in for the day. Travel, which has been another very public use case for face recognition, and then transportation. And these sort of bottom 8 icons represent where we see the market for face recognition being that extends beyond what are more traditional use cases for face recognition, or what people typically think about and quite frankly worry about. And I would largely say that these are relatively controversial use cases, whereas these ones below here are more sort of convenience-driven use cases. And having said that, what I would say is that in both of those sets of use cases, the idea that you would have differential performance based on some sort of factor of your appearance, whether it be skin tone, age, gender, and occlusion, whether I'm wearing a hat, glasses, et cetera, it's unacceptable in both of those use cases. It just has if you get it wrong, it has a arguably much bigger impact in these use cases up here. And our job, of course, is to get it right. One thing that we've done at Paravision is actually decided, at least for the time being, not to actually service the law enforcement industry, precisely because we don't think that the proper legislation, guidelines, training are in place. And that's not true across all of law enforcement. I think there are some departments that are using face recognition, have a history of using it. more responsibly than others, but to a large degree, it's just not, we're not there yet from a legislative perspective. And I think we'll circle back to that later. So the question surrounding all of this is, do I want to be identified, right? Do I want to have my visage sort of matched to a database for a particular reason? And our belief is that those use cases should be notice and consent driven. So I've been given notice that face recognition is in use, and I've given my consent that I would like for it to be used in those use cases. And I would say that there are as many examples of face recognition where people actually want that notice and consent to be given than ones that where they don't. So the next question comes: can I be accurately identified? So some of you may have seen the sort of brilliant New York Times piece about Mr. Robert Williams here, who's wrongfully, in their words, wrongfully accused by an algorithm. And so this can obviously, I think this is one of probably 3 use cases in the past 3 years, 3 or 4, where this type of result happened. Usually it's the result of not only the algorithm, although I think that definitely played a part here, but also police work. And this is where I go back to training being a sort of a core component of this. So face recognition is a relatively new technology. And do we trust at this point people who have not been trained on how to use that technology in a robust manner? Do we trust them to use the technology in order to make what are, at the end of the day, life-changing decisions for an individual? In this particular case, it was a combination of a few things that went wrong. Number one was the police work involved. So first of all, they never should have used this photo for face recognition, which was the photo that was used to as the basis for arrest of Mr. Williams. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. And number two, the algorithm that they used did a couple of things wrong. So number one, they didn't have a sort of what we would call a quality metric in there that would have cost us. So even if the officers did not know how to use the technology, an algorithm in this space should have been able to identify for the end user that this was not an appropriate photo or frame of a video to be used for face recognition. And in this case, we have a quality score that goes from 0 to 1 in the face recognition that we distribute. This didn't even, believe we set our face detection threshold here at 0.885, which is our normal threshold. This didn't even sort of suggest a face that could be used for face recognition at the 0.30 threshold. And so this never should have been used at all. This goes beyond the fact that Mr. Williams later sort of indicated he was not a St. Louis Cardinals fan, and that question alone probably would have gotten him sort of out of this predicament. And he was arrested and held for about 48 hours, and was repeatedly asked, "Is this you?" To which he said, "No, this is not me. It is obviously not me." And they ended up releasing him, and the City of Detroit Police Department ended up issuing an apology for the use of the technology in this case. So again, what went wrong there? Bad police work, face recognition algorithm that should have actually caught that this face should not have been used for an identification. And then furthermore, the quality of the actual matching algorithm is not a sort of a best-in-class face recognition provider. And the great news is that we actually have our National Institute of Standards and Technologies has run an independent testing lab for face recognition technologies for the last almost a decade, where they stack rank all of the providers of face recognition that submit their algorithms to the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And most of the legislation that Congress is looking at is looking to NIST because they have a history and track record of being able to test this technology independently and incredibly robustly, including producing a very recent diversity report to see how these different algorithms do specifically on the topics of age, gender, ethnicity, skin tone, et cetera. So we look to NIST as being a part of the solution as we go forward. So can I be accurately identified? In this case, no, I don't think there's a face recognition in the world, nor is there a human in the world that could accurately make an identification based on this very, very fuzzy image. And it just shouldn't have been submitted as evidence. But is face recognition good? Is it good enough? And I would argue that that it is good enough to be used in a number of use cases, as long as proper guardrails are in place. And as an exhibit of this, our face recognition technology, which is currently ranked number 6 globally from an accuracy perspective by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, is our face recognition. And I think going back to people that are behind us in the queue, the top 8 algorithms in the world are now better than the best iris recognition in the world across a like data set. So you can see at the bottom here, 640,000 records as an operational database versus 500,000 records in this database using dual eye iris recognition. And this is a pretty kind of a watershed moment, actually, for face recognition, to the degree where the best algorithms in the world are now getting to be good enough that they can actually be used for a whole range of applications. Now it's incumbent upon us, now that it is this good, to make sure that the proper guardrails are in place. And quite frankly, I think we're a little late to the game in developing those guardrails as a society. But I think the short answer here is that yes, and it's getting better. And why would I even want to use face recognition? Is because face recognition computers are better at identifying these types of issues where I'm trying to find a single face amongst several 100,000 cases. They can lead to huge time and life savings in the case of law enforcement, and are just more practical than, say, a security guard guarding a building or guarding a gate, needing to identify the 10,000 people that come in every day, and more secure than that badge that somebody might use to get in there. I could hand my badge to Elizabeth or Jane, and they could each get into my building. And we've had this sort of really weird false sense of security that is a secure mechanism for entering a building for years. So there are uses for it. It is accurate enough, and yes, it does need to be regulated. So can algorithmic bias be mitigated? Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and it's in the best interest of everyone in the industry that we work in. And I would say this about computer vision writ large. Algorithmic bias or algorithmic harm, as Elizabeth called it, is not only in face recognition, but I do think it's probably one of the better examples of it, because it's such a palpable, tangible thing that, quite frankly, a lot of us have sort of an icky feeling about, for lack of better words. And I think that's, but it also shows up in how people are using artificial intelligence to look at credit scores and whether or not somebody gets a credit card. So it's not just face recognition, but it can be, this bias can be mitigated. Inside an organization, it needs to be a priority, and it needs to be one of the top priorities inside the organization. We're fortunate enough, we've got 6 PhDs and 3 masters in computer vision and deep learning and artificial intelligence inside our organization, and an incredibly diverse team. So 40% women, it's 70% underrepresented communities, and that's in part by design, right? We want we want our team to be reflective of humanity, because they're creating a technology that can impact humanity. Number 2, it needs to use holistic thinking. So, and I'm so glad that Elizabeth brought this up earlier. It's not, race is and I'll put it in quotes, race is a piece of it, and it's a piece that the media, I think, rightly focuses on. But as important, it's actually the intersection of having a diverse data set by age, gender, skin tone, occlusion, environment, environmental factors. All of those things play into having a robust data set. It's not just one thing. And if you focus on one thing, you're going to end up missing the point, and not producing great results. And number three, it's never done. So as soon as you solve it, or you think you've got low differential performance across those different intersections, those 5 or 6 different intersections, the next algorithm that you produce could increase accuracy overall of face recognition, but it might impact one of those communities. And so our goal as technologists is to make sure that we reduce the band of differential performance to as small as possible. And that on every single algorithm that we produce, that we rigorously test and benchmark it to make sure that there aren't wild swings in that. We always have work to do here. We're never done. It's always a top priority in our organization. And we look to NIST for the National Institute of Standards and Technology for independent validation that we're doing the right thing, and that internally we look to our own internal benchmarks that we've developed around this issue to make sure that that we can sort of train to make sure that we get this reality. So I mentioned team diversity before. The other ways that we train, starting with that sort of base of a diverse team where it matters to everybody on our team. We gather data globally, which is important, with proper releases. So we think about the world, and we developed our AI principles around making sure that any artificial intelligence that we developed meets 2 broad criteria, and there's some specific sub-criteria, that it's ethically trained and conscientiously sold. And I'll go first into ethically trained. So make sure that we gather very diverse data, and that we have proper releases from people, that they know that their face is being used to train an algorithm for face recognition. Number 2, that we aim for equally balanced training and benchmarks. We're actually one of the first companies in the world to develop our own internal diversity benchmark that is separate from our training data set. It's incredibly important to make sure that we, across those intersections, again, diversity does not just mean one thing. It means a whole panoply of things, and you have to get them all right. And the final one is actually probably the most important piece of it, is just to be really rigorous about seeking out and filling data gaps. So when we get something wrong, that is an opportunity for us to improve, right? And so what we tell our partners is, they're sort of, if you find anything where it's not working for an individual person, send that back to us so we can actually root out where it is, because we can supplement our data sets to make sure that we cover those use cases if we do have that wrong. And so in that way, the software is evolving and getting better every single day. But it wouldn't be if we didn't have this focus. And then conscientiously sold. So it's ethically trained and then conscientiously sold. So for every single customer that we have, we review the organization, make sure that we're comfortable with the organization. We review the specific use case. There are a whole host of use cases that we just won't entertain. We review the region where the face recognition is going to be deployed. So for instance, sometimes you might have a use case that we would find fine in the US, but used in a country that has a history of human rights violations, we're not going to sell to that country. It doesn't matter what the use case is. And so we have a list of 37 countries that we actually just refuse to sell to, and have quite frankly turned down millions of dollars in business on that basis. And then finally, and probably most importantly, is we work with our partners to ensure proper understanding and implementation, to the point where we have written into our contracts the specific use cases that our partners can use it for, and only for those use cases. And then we help them launch. We make sure that the people that are going to be using it, using the technology, get the proper training. And sometimes we're working through one step of the organization. So we need to make sure that they are training their end users for that. And so that we have a use case review board that does this on a weekly basis, a standing meeting on Mondays. It's rare that a week goes by that we don't have one of those meetings. For the most complicated use cases, we bring in Elizabeth to help us out, where we're having a quandary, where we just don't know quite what the right answer is, and we'd like another perspective. We bring Elizabeth in. Fortunately, that hasn't happened too frequently thus far. And then we use our AI principles to guide us. Those are not lip service. Those AI principles are deeply embedded in the DNA, to the point where we have every single one of our employees acknowledge the receipt and that they are abiding by those AI principles. And that's a step that a lot of organizations have not taken yet, but really should. And I will say thank you here, and we can open it up to questions, which I think are probably going to be the most interesting part of this. But I'll sort of close by saying, I'm not saying we're holier than thou. You know, we have a lot of work to do. This is going to continue to be an evolution. I don't think face recognition is going away. I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater, to use probably like just an absolutely archaic term, you know, our aphorism here. There are some very, very great use cases for the technology that can not only save lives, but also just make our lives more convenient and secure. And we need to take a scalpel to it, not a huge sledgehammer. And that's what we're working towards. And one of the things I love about working with Elizabeth is that she's open-minded to the technology working, provided it's got the right guardrails set up and people are working on it in the right way. So I'm going to stop my share now, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Jane, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, both of you. You have such a wealth of information about what's happening in the space. Right. Let me just start off with a question. You know, they had a lot of Senate hearings around big tech companies, you know, with Facebook and Google and everybody out there. There was a flurry of discussions, and they kind of came and went. And now we have this congressional bill around facial recognition. Do you think that they're going to carry the torch on this, or what do you think is going to be the outcome of this magnifying glass in facial recognition from Congress?
Elizabeth, I'll let
that. Yeah,
I'm sure. I'm happy to go first here. And then you please follow on. So I think you're referring, Jane, to Senator Murphy and Senator Booker's bill. My hunch is it doesn't pass because of how broad reaching it is. So let's just first get to whether or not it's a realistic bill. But I think it serves a purpose, and the purpose is drawing people's attention to how important this topic is and how far-reaching the impact of the issue is. And so I don't think it will pass because it's calling for a halt to the use of face recognition technology across a range of different government use cases, everything from you know, the government using it in defense and intelligence constructs where it's been used for, you know, since post 9/11, really, to any broad use case, including access control into facilities, you know, payments, all of that at a sort of government level. So I don't think it will pass, but I think it's one of several initiatives over the course of the past couple of years that's been introduced that really get to this very, very important issue of we just don't want this technology to be used to target underrepresented communities. And or to be misused and abused in some sort of surveillance state type arrangement. Now, realistically, and we do know departments, we don't work with them, but we do know departments that use the technology incredibly responsibly to help solve crimes. And I think what will likely happen is that there will end up being, and I don't mean to say that they don't have a common sense approach to it, it's just so far reaching. I think there will be a sort of a retreat to a sort of a more acceptable approach for all people that still makes it clear that there need to be boundaries and, most importantly, hurdles that people need to clear. So NIST tests over 200 algorithms in their testing every year. But what NIST doesn't do is prescribe a bar that you need to get over in order to be used in these different applications. And they might not be the right body or agency to do that, but they're certainly the right ones to advise that, what that bar should be for acceptability. And then what I imagine will happen is if that bar is set, you'll have more and more technology companies racing to clear that bar. And then we can tighten it even more. So I'm excited about the legislation that's happening because I think it's much needed to erase a lot of the fear that we're going to somehow turn into China here and have a surveillance state, which I don't think is realistic in the US. and yet at the same time, very cognizant and aware of the fact that everybody who has a mobile phone knows that to a degree, that capability already exists to live in that society if the government decides to use that in the way that that they could. Now, Elizabeth, I'll pass it off to you.
Well, Doug, you said it best. I agree with you. But what I will also say is that what we're seeing from a city level across the country is a lot more focus on it, because communities are banding together to kind of work with their elected officials to determine what are the best technologies for their communities. And so hopefully that work through the city level will bubble up to more of the federal level, so that policymakers on the federal level can also understand and have better an idea of how these technologies can work better in communities, as we've seen across the country.
Can I just add one more thing here, Jane, just to follow on what Elizabeth said? Like actually in San Francisco, if you both recall, they banned face recognition outright across the entire city, including in sort of private organizations. And but definitely for government use was the sort of the clear indication there. And then they realized that a few years back they had signed on to use Face ID from with iOS devices to get into a bunch of their systems. And so this is again that approach of like, let's not throw it all out. Like the internet's bad too, right? Like all sorts of harm has come from the internet, as we've seen in all too clear detail over the course of the past 6 to 12 months. But that it should be reined in, and we just need people to focus on it. And I agree with Elizabeth. A lot of that's just going to come from community concern and community activism, them raising the issue and then I think law enforcement departments opening up and being transparent about how they're using it and wanting to have the dialogue. I mean, that's the most important thing, is just wanting to have the dialogue.
Yeah, and I think that this applies to all of the topics in AI, is that there's this magic deep learning technology being deployed everywhere, and there's a lot of times no understanding of what it's actually doing underneath the covers. And so I think we'll just see more and more of this. Daniel, you had a question?
Yes, Jane, thank you. Thank you for a great presentation. I think it was a terrific introduction and a wonderful summary of the use cases. I really like the idea of harms, by the way. Thank you, Elizabeth and Doug. My question is for both of you. In terms of how you consider selling the product and the services, reviewing the use case, the client, etc., I'm intrigued at how you attempt to learn what you don't know. So our knowledge and experiences are limited, and as time passes, more is learned. How do you collect more information to decide what to do, and even towards the future? For example, is it possible to revoke use if something bubbles up that troubles you?
Yeah, then I'm probably slightly better situated to handle this than Elizabeth, but I don't know, Elizabeth, if you have thoughts, and then, or I can dive in here.
Yeah, dive in and I'll add.
Okay, that sounds great. Daniel, I think it's one of the key questions, right? We had, to a large degree, and this is why trust is so important with our partners, in that we spend a long time. So in a lot of cases, we'll spend a year with a partner before we actually sign them up as a partner. That allows us to not only really dive deep into the plans of how the technology is going to be used, but also help us understand and build a story of how, not only how it's going to be used, but where it is going to be used. And that where is a pretty important question to answer. So we ask direct questions, and we do build into our contracts that we can revoke use. And yet at the same time, we don't have a magic button to turn it off, right? A lot of our technology is delivered as an SDK. And so we have to have faith in contracts here, and then make sure that we follow up on it. But I think it is one of the, we do have, what you call trust in contracts, that they will abide by the contracts that we lay out before them. And I don't think, frankly, we have a better way of dealing with that right now. Now, I would contrast this with, say, Microsoft and Amazon who also have cognitive services, AWS and Azure with Microsoft's cognitive services, they have ways that they can turn off customers, right? Because they provide a cloud-oriented service. As companies move more to the edge to deploy AI at the edge, which will happen in the transportation space, will happen in every space, that kill switch is a little bit tougher to provide. And a lot of companies obviously don't want it. And they don't want it because they don't want interruption of service. They want to be able to talk with their partner about what they've heard first before a customer makes a sort of a rash decision to turn them off. And you see the way that that this is, the impact of this is evident when, say, for instance, I believe Amazon and Microsoft recently turned off what was the Twitter alternative, Parler. Yeah, they basically said you can't use AWS with Parler for a while until you get a hold of your hate speech. I mean, that's a powerful tool that they have that we don't have right now, and I think it's going to be building those kill switches in somehow is going to be important going forward. And yet, there's going to be huge reluctance from companies, given what happened with Parler and what's happened before that, to sign up for that. So I think it's an unanswered question, and it's one that we just try to dig in and answer the best we can, and dig up as much information as we can.
And I think to add to that, one of the ways that I have found that some companies are doing to uncover some of their AI blind spots is through what I've might have discussed called ethical tech design, which is really unpacking your entire life cycle to make sure it's explainable, auditable, so that when you begin to develop these, you can bring in diverse voices, make sure that your technology is inclusive of those voices, so you can eliminate or mitigate some of those AI blind spots before it even makes its way out into the marketplace.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I have another question from the audience. How is rising concern and attention on data privacy going to impact facial recognition? Some of the tech giants and academic institutions have quietly taken down their public databases.
Again, I'm happy to start here again too, Elizabeth. Some of these seems kind of more targeted towards the sort of the company line of thinking here. But again, you have such great thoughts, so please follow on. So I would say let's put it this way. I don't think there are going to be a lot of new face recognition companies that emerge in the next several years. And that's largely because there's been a sort of ease of access to large open source public data sets that these universities have been curating. And I think trying to curate in a responsible way. I don't think any of the universities, whether it's Megaface, which I think is University of Washington, or Labeled Faces in the Wild, I don't think anybody they were actually seeking to advance the technology, not necessarily to quote unquote, sort of violate people's privacy. They use largely public images from the internet, largely celebrity data sets. I think I think that's going to actually have a huge impact on sort of new companies that come to market that haven't been in this for a while. And the other thing that I would say is, I think it's probably the best thing that's ever happened to this industry is the takedown of these open source data sets. And the reason for that is that to a large degree, a lot of these, again, despite best intentions here and the phenomenal researchers that put it out, a lot of the publicly available imagery on the internet and the way in which you kind of need to bring identities together, if you're using celebrity images, there's a whole lot of bias in that industry as well. And so you end up with effectively whitewashed databases. And that, I think, leads to a lot of this subpar or huge differential performance that some companies see on issues of age, race, gender. And so I think it's actually a phenomenal thing that's happening in the industry right now. And I think it's going to be a bump in the road, but I think long term, people are finding the right way to collect data.
And I'll just add that I don't know if we'll ever solve the data privacy issues unless we have really strong legislation. And I mentioned in my portion of the presentation that the Minneapolis City Council passed data privacy principles for that reason, to protect residents, protect them from abuse of use for their data, and also to give them an outlet so that people can request from the city of Minneapolis how their data is being used, and they have to respond to that. So I think it's going to be a conversation that we're going to have for a very long time.
I am very disappointed that we're at the end of the hour because I have a gazillion more questions to ask you. So I'm just gonna thank you, and thank you very much, Elizabeth and Doug, for sharing your insights. And I think more importantly, for starting the effort and the discussions that will lead to accountability and increased understanding of how to address these challenging problems going forward, because they're very complex and sit between that technology, social science boundary that are very hard to understand. So thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. And finally, a reminder for our upcoming seminars. Judy Hoffman from Georgia Tech will be joining us, as well as Larissa Parker from Siemens. So keep an eye on the calendar for those. And again, thank you so much. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank
You too.
you. Thank you
Bye
so
all.
much.